This house belongs to me and my parents. Write up the divorce papers and leave Liam, my husband. He treats me like a maid and always favors his parents. I've been patient until now to not upset my parents, who were happy about our marriage. But if he's going to act like this in front of them, I'm done. Okay, I'll do what you want. I walked out of the room, bringing my upset parents with me. When will he understand all his mistakes? I can't wait for that moment. I'm Jessica, 29 years old. My parents were both 40 when I was born. They really wanted a child, but it was tough, and the treatments for infertility weren't as good back then, so they went through a lot of sadness. Just when they were about to give up, I came along. They still talk about it happily, even now, because I was the child they'd been waiting so long for. My parents showered me with love. When I see my old photos, I can feel how much they cared for me. Even though my parents weren't rich, they made sure to celebrate special occasions like my birthday, Easter, and even my kindergarten graduation in a big way. They were super supportive of my education too. Whenever I showed interest in something, like learning English or reading, they'd jump to support me. They'd enroll me in English classes and buy me lots of books. They always said, "If it helps with your studies, just tell us, and we'll make it happen." Looking back, I realized they must have struggled to pay for all of it, but they never let on. They always had smiles on their faces and threw big celebrations whenever I did well in school. As I got older, my friends would sometimes think my parents were my grandparents, but it didn't bother me. I met my husband, Leon, through a matchmaking service. We both had elderly parents and were only children, so we connected over our similar situations. We shared hobbies and had great conversations. Our relationship progressed smoothly, and we eventually decided to tie the knot. My parents were overjoyed at our wedding and blessed our marriage with tears of love. In the beginning, I was working after we got married. Both of us have elderly parents, which wasn't something we were unhappy about, but we couldn't help but wish they were younger. It's tough to raise kids when you're older. We wanted to start a family soon, so Leon suggested that I quit my job to focus on raising a child. I loved my job, but his words made sense. I remembered my mom telling me about her night shift job and the stress it brought, and how it might have affected their ability to conceive. So I thought it might be a good idea to quit my job and focus on creating the right environment for having a baby. Leon also reassured me by saying, "You could always go back to work when our child is older." That made me feel better about the decision. Luckily, I had a professional certification that meant I could go back to work whenever I wanted. So I decided to leave my job and focus on being a full-time homemaker. But after we got married, Leon's attitude changed. Before, I thought he saw me as an equal, but suddenly, he acted like he was better than me. Being a housewife isn't easy. I had to cook 3 meals a day, do all the cleaning, laundry, and everything else. Things that were no big deal when I lived alone became a challenge, especially since Leon was really picky about everything and wouldn't let anything slide. Dinner should always have at least 3 dishes, and there should be hot pancakes for breakfast. My mom managed it all even while she worked. When I wake up, my suit and shirt should be ready on a hanger. Just grab my bag and go, he'd say, as if that's the least a housewife should do. That's how my parents always did it. Whenever I tried to object, he'd snap back, "You're a housewife, remember? Don't get too high and mighty while living off my money." That became his go-to line. Despite his complaints about me spending his money, what Leon gave for household expenses barely covered it all. I spend my days carefully managing our budget, constantly searching the internet for ways to save money. One day, I mentioned, maybe I should go back to work. Leon shot that idea down with, "You used to work at a law firm, right? Being a secretary won't bring in much. I won't let you neglect the housework for that." So he wouldn't even consider letting me return to work. I wondered if Leon was misunderstanding something, but by then, I was too exhausted from his constant complaints and yelling to argue. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I could keep up with the quality of housekeeping if I also had a job. Plus, I didn't want to disappoint my parents, who were thrilled about our marriage, so I couldn't talk to them about it. But it wasn't just Liam's behavior that bothered me. He often invited his parents over. Whether it was Mother's Day, Father's Day, or their birthdays, he'd find any reason to have them visit and expect me to prepare the meal. Each time, he'd give me extra money, telling me to buy fancy fish or make steak with premium beef. When his parents came over, Leon would shower them with gifts. They'd eat and drink as if our house was theirs, without ever thanking me. Then they'd leave. Once, I brought up to Leon the idea of inviting my parents over occasionally. I told him I admired how he honored his parents, and I didn't oppose it, but I hoped we could also include mine. Leon's response was immediate and harsh. He snapped, "Why would we do that? Understand this, I'm the one paying for everything. Why should I spend money on your parents who aren't even blood related to me?" With that, he shut down the conversation. Feeling defeated, I began using my savings from before we were married to secretly buy gifts for my parents. Then, one day, my parents reached out to me with a troubled look. They explained that there had been a fire in the apartment next to theirs, and part of their home was damaged. Thankfully, they were safe, but their house needed significant repairs. They were temporarily staying in a makeshift shelter. I made the decision to visit my parents, knowing they were going through a difficult time. Despite their troubles, they welcomed me warmly. During our conversation, my father gently asked about my marriage, and although I felt a pang of sadness, I assured him that everything was all right between Leon and me. When I asked about their future plans, my father explained that their old house, which had been partially damaged in a fire, was too old to salvage. They were considering moving into a modern Renaissance apartment. My mother sighed, expressing sadness at the thought of leaving behind the memories in our family's ancestral home. It was then that I made a decision. I resolved to discuss the situation with Leon when I returned home. "Remember when I mentioned my parents' house was damaged in a fire?" I began. Considering their age, I was thinking of buying them a new house, one with accessibility features. Leon's response was blunt. "Where's the money coming from?" "I'm not contributing." "As expected," I replied. "I don't plan on building a mansion, so it won't be a financial burden on you. I intend to use my savings from before we were married." After a moment of consideration, Leon casually replied, "Guess even a law firm clerk can save that much." "Well, if it's not coming from my pocket, then it's fine." And with that, I made the decision to gift my parents a new home. I felt it was finally time to repay their kindness. Months later, I informed Leon, "I'll be helping my parents move tomorrow." Leon's response was curt. "All right, just don't forget about your household duties," before retreating to the bedroom. The next day, I assisted my parents with their move. Unbeknownst to me, a group of individuals had begun following me. As we carried my parents' belongings into their new home, we settled into the living room, filled with the joy of being reunited as a family after so long. Suddenly, to our astonishment, Leon and my in-laws burst in. With a declaration, Leon announced, "From today, this is my house." Leon's sudden appearance caught me off guard. "What are you doing here?" I asked, surprised. He chuckled, saying, "I heard you were moving today, so I followed you." Confused, I replied, "Moving? What do you mean? This is my parents' house." But Leon insisted, "I've been supporting you all this time. You should be grateful to have married someone like me. Now it's your turn to take care of my parents." His words filled me with disgust. As I stared at him in silence, he coldly declared, "I've canceled the lease on our apartment. Pack your things and leave." My father began to speak, but I silenced him. With a strange calmness, a plan formed in my mind. Instead of my father, I asserted, "This house belongs to my parents and me." Leon laughed, mocking me, "Do you not understand English? I'm saying the house you bought was mine all along. It's not yours, we're your parents. Oh, and I've left divorce papers for you to sign at home. Make sure you submit them." Ignoring my parents' attempts to intervene, I reluctantly acquiesced to Leon's demands. "Fine, I'll do as you say." I conceded, then directed the movers to reload the truck we had just unloaded. While overseeing the process, another truck arrived, bearing Leon's and his parents' belongings. Comforting my bewildered parents, I promised, I'll explain everything later. Just trust me for now. Together, we vacated the premises. During our journey, I divulged the situation to my parents. I've kept silent about this until now, I confessed. Upon hearing the full story, they grasped the gravity of the situation and commended my actions. Their praise stirred within me a familiar sense of joy, reminiscent of the praise I received from them as a child. A few weeks later, my phone rang incessantly, with Leon's name flashing on the screen. With a sigh, I reluctantly picked up. Before I could even say hello, Leon erupted. "What's going on with this house you bought? Someone's threatening to call the cops if I don't leave." "Yes, that's right," I confirmed, bracing myself for what would come next. Leon's voice rose in disbelief. "So when you said it was our house, you meant this rental?" I couldn't help but chuckle at the misunderstanding. His reaction was immediate and furious. "Stop laughing and explain. Wasn't this house meant for your parents?" Taking a deep breath, I began to unravel the tangled web of miscommunication. I clarified to Leon the sequence of events. How the house I purchased for my parents was undergoing renovations, but due to a mistake by the renovation company, it wasn't ready on time. In a last-minute scramble, they arranged for us to stay in a model home until the renovations were completed. However, Leon and his parents mistakenly moved into the model home before we could explain the situation. Seizing the opportunity for revenge after Leon's outburst, I chose to play along with his misunderstanding. Following that ordeal, I relocated all our belongings to a rented storage unit and temporarily stayed in a hotel with my parents. Following Leon's instructions, I proceeded with the divorce papers, ultimately ending our marriage. My parents expressed their wish that I had confided in them earlier, but I believe it all worked out for the best. Being with my parents during that time was invaluable, and I successfully parted ways with Leon. Now, we're happily settled in our newly renovated home. I made sure not to disclose our new address to Leon, ensuring he remained unaware of our whereabouts. On one occasion, he questioned how I planned to support myself without him, assuming I was merely a stay-at-home wife. With a touch of disdain, I clarified, "You've been mistaken all this time. I'm actually a professional lawyer." Leon appeared taken aback, his response tinged with confusion. Reflecting on our initial meeting at a matchmaking service, I remembered how Leon had asked about my profession. At the time, I mentioned working at a law firm, but he assumed I was a secretary. I didn't correct him then, as I'd grown accustomed to people reacting negatively when I mentioned being a lawyer. It surprised me that Leon still thought of me as a secretary. It revealed his lack of interest in truly knowing me. It seemed he preferred the idea of a housewife over an equal partner. Realizing this, I calmly explained, as we're married, I could rightfully claim ownership of the property purchased with my pre-marriage savings. Asserting my rights, I continued, those savings remain mine and aren't subject to division. If you have objections, we can settle it in court, but the outcome is clear. With that, silence greeted me from the other end of the line. Disregarding Leon's remarks, I bid him farewell with a simple, "Take care of your parents," before ending the call. Details of what ensued reached me through a former colleague, now a fellow attorney. Despite his repeated attempts to reach out, I found it necessary to communicate with him solely through legal representation. Leon persisted in demanding the return of money spent during our marriage. After negotiations with our respective lawyers, he reluctantly grasped the impracticality of his request, though not without disappointment. Such reactions were to be expected. After all, I had become a stay-at-home wife at his insistence, and it was his obligation as a husband to provide for our family. Fulfilling my duties as a homemaker, I never faltered. With the termination of our apartment lease initiated by Leon, he found himself without a place to stay. Presently, he has resettled in the cramped condo where his parents reside, the three of them uncomfortably sharing the limited space. Leon's financial situation was dire. His meager salary coupled with his lavish spending on personal pursuits and gifts for his parents left him virtually penniless. Despite our previous circumstances, Leon had begun expressing a desire for a larger house. It seemed he concocted this plan after I mentioned to my parents my own aspirations of buying a home. Needless to say, his scheme failed spectacularly. To assume we would vacate quietly, even if it were a temporary residence, displayed a level of naivety that was almost laughable. It's disheartening to realize just how misguided my ex-husband could be. Now weary of caring for his parents in their cramped condo, Leon has persistently sought reconciliation. However, now that he is aware of my profession as a lawyer, I have chosen to ignore his advances. Currently, I am relishing the comforts of my new home alongside my parents. The idea of remarriage isn't particularly appealing to me at the moment. However, a fellow attorney whom I collaborated with during my divorce from Leon has expressed interest. I am considering adopting a more optimistic outlook, perhaps to grant my beloved parents the joy of meeting